Hello, everyone, and welcome to This is Recruiting, a series focused on helping tech recruiters and HR professionals around the world find actionable insights and tips from fellow recruiters in taking tech to the next level. I hope you're all staying safe and taking care of yourself. I'm Alfred. I head the marketing team over here at HackerVert, where our vision is to match developers to the right opportunities all across the globe through accurate coding assessments, remote interviews, and virtual hackathons. For today, we have with us Martin Kelly from HubSpot. Welcome, Martin. How are you doing?
Hey Alfred, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Great. I hope you're holding up well during the pandemic, and also hope that everyone you know is staying safe.
Yeah, we're still in lockdown here over in Ireland, but yeah, staying safe and working remotely.
Great. That's fantastic. I mean, it's funny, right? At the start of the year, we would never have imagined that, we're all going to be working remotely, that there's going to be a pandemic that's gripping us. It's funny how things have
Yeah,
changed, huh?
2020 has been a crazy year. Just got to see what's coming next, right?
Absolutely. The least we can do is stay hopeful for what
Yeah,
2021 is going to bring us. Hopefully, a lot of good.
yeah. Has to be better than this, right?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be better than this. Right. Okay. So, Martin, for the uninitiated, why didn't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at HubSpot?
Sure thing. So my name is Martin Kelly, and I work at HubSpot from our Dublin office, which is our Europe, Middle East, and Africa HQ. HubSpot is a software as a service company headquartered out of Boston, and I'm a principal recruiter working primarily on engineering. And I've been at HubSpot for just over 5 years now, working in a bunch of different recruiting roles, doing everything from leading a team up to more recently moving back into a principal IC role. So yeah, always been focused on the engineering side of things, and yeah, it's an incredibly busy time for hiring right now.
Yes, absolutely. And I hear you were also a software engineer, right, by education, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, so maybe pretty unusual that I studied software engineering. I started out as a software engineer, never expected to be a recruiter. I don't think many people start out thinking, I want to be a recruiter when I grow up. But what started as an experiment 15 years later is still, that experiment is still happening, and I'm still continuing to learn and really enjoy the craft of recruiting. So I do think that technical background is helpful when it comes to working with engineers every day, whether that's you know candidates that are interested in picking up a job at HubSpot, or whether that's working with a director or VP of engineering to really understand what they're looking for on their team.
Yeah, I think it's a valuable skill to have as well, right? Understanding both sides of the equation from the candidate perspective as well as from a hiring manager perspective. I think the whole process would go a lot more smoother that way.
Yeah, for sure. And from a technical perspective, I enjoy having those conversations, but at this stage, nobody would pay me to code anymore. I'm gone way beyond that level of technicality.
All right. Okay. Awesome. So let's jump into some of the questions that we've got. So, firstly, I mean, at a very basic level, so how does HubSpot really use coding assessments at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. So before I jump straight into the coding assessment, I might talk a little bit about some changes that we made to our face-to-face interview process, and I guess how that inspired the coding assessment in its current form. So a little while back, we reviewed how we were doing our interviews at the office, and we really wanted to move away from those Google type interviews where it was a lot of coding on a whiteboard. It was very focused on whether you know how to solve that particular algorithm or not. we really wanted to change that and try to make it to be more realistic to, how an engineer works day to day when they're at the office. So as a result of that, we tried to move away from whiteboard, coding as much as possible, in favor of having the interviewee bring their own laptop to the interview, use their own IDE that they're familiar with, use their own documentation, and really have an environment that's as close as possible to how it would be if they were, at work. And that includes, having access to Google, being able to jump on Stack Overflow, whatever that might be. So those changes started with the face-to-face interview process. And as we made those improvements, we then moved on to looking at our coding assessment. So back when I first started at HubSpot, we were using a third-party provider for coding assessments. It was pretty good, but we wanted to try something different. And trying to get the commitment of, engineers are in so much demand. It can be very hard to get them to commit to doing a coding assessment before they, they come into the hiring process, before they know that much about you or your company. So we really felt we needed to invest in getting that experience right, so we could, get these people to move through the hiring process with us. So that's the background as to where the coding assessment came from. And I guess at the center of what we're trying to do is create a problem for engineers to be able to solve at home, in an environment that's as close to their normal working environment as possible. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what that involves, if you're interested.
Great. That sounds good. And I think what you're also trying to say is that you're going to give a candidate the best kind of experience as well while passing through the entire process, right? I mean, more often than not, I've seen interviewing and assessment processes, or just hiring process in itself, wherein you're completely disconnected from what you're going to be doing once you get hired and get onboarded, right? It's good to know that, it's good to know that
put so much effort into finding great people, and you think about all the time that us recruiters spend on LinkedIn, and all the time that we spend on interviewing, but that sort of middle stage at the coding assessment, it can sometimes feel like that unloved middle child. They're sort of forgotten about a little bit. They're sort of competing with their siblings on either side. But if you look at the average time to hire, it's that time in the middle around the coding assessment where really that's make or break for getting people to move through the process.
Got it. And also giving them a feel of what it's going to be like to actually work at HubSpot, right? And what you're going to be working on, or the tools that you're going to be working on once you get onboarded. That's going to be a positive feeling as well for every candidate, because now they know what they're getting into.
Yeah, this is a two-way evaluation, right? Just evaluating the skills of the engineer. They're going to be judging you. They're really their senior process for the first time, and when it comes to later stages in the process, hopefully they interview, they do well, you want to make them an offer. It's that experience of going through that process with you that they're going to remember. So there's an opportunity to use your coding assessment to get you some competitive advantage when it comes to the closing stages.
Perfect. All right, so what's your strategy when it comes to hiring developers? I mean, every recruiter I've spoken to, they've told me a little bit of their own secret sauce or secret ingredient that they use to help identify or figure out who's the right fit versus who's not. So what's your strategy?
I would say we have a couple of different approaches. HubSpot, at the core of what we do, we're an inbound company. So we help millions of companies to grow their businesses better. And that is a philosophy that we apply to how we grow and how we hire as well. So a big part of how we've been successful with growing the engineering org has been building a great brand that engineers want to work for, engineers and everybody else. So some of the things that have worked incredibly well have been, for example, our engineering blog. We have a employer brand team, which is an incredibly great resource for any recruiting team to have close by, who are focused on really understanding what are the things that make HubSpot a great place for an engineer to work at, and then how can we encapsulate that and share it out to our community, and how do we engage with people not when they're necessarily just looking for a change right now, but how can we build that awareness with them, so if they're considering a change in a year or 2 years or 3 years time, they remember HubSpot and they already feel like they have that relationship with us before they're ready to move. So about half of the hires that we make come from people that have engaged with HubSpot in some way and have noticed that we're hiring and have reached out that way. And I would say the second part of the strategy then has really been working on our own recruiting outreach strategy. The channel that we have the most control over, and our recruiters will target 30% of our hires to come from our own recruiter outreach. So that's how we are going to build diverse teams. That's how we're going to really be able to go and find that that difficult to find talent that don't just generally hang around on job boards or apply in. So they've been our two main strategies there.
Got it. And especially on the employer branding bit that you mentioned, right? So is it really necessary right now for companies like HubSpot to brand themselves as tech companies to make sure you attract the right kind of tech talent, right? Or is it enough for you to just talk about what HubSpot really does and use HubSpot's like the success that HubSpot's already found in order to attract this talent? Or do you really need to talk about how much of a tech brand you guys are as well?
Yeah, it needs to be authentic, and I think there can be multiple different sort of personas within that brand. So we've got HubSpot the company, and our mission around what we do as a company. But then we've also got what does it mean to be an engineer at HubSpot, and then even within the product and engineering team, you've got what does it mean to be an engineer working on the data infrastructure team versus being an engineer working on the campaigns team. So each team, each department has its own identity, and what we're trying to do is really, just like with the coding assessment, where we're showing engineers this is what it's like to be an engineer at HubSpot. When it comes to position descriptions, when it comes to the content that's going out on the engineering blog, we really want to give people a sense of this is what it's like to be an engineer working for this specific team, in the engineering org. And yeah, each team has its own different quirks and personalities and its own uniqueness about it. And I think that's the story that we need to tell.
Got it. So telling the unique story about what it's like to work within each section itself is something that you guys have been using. That's actually quite good.
Yeah, if you think back to our job descriptions, even up to not that long ago, it was probably in size 12 Times New Roman, a big list of demands that company is looking for, and that's really changing to being less about what we want and more what you're going to get by taking this role. And it really comes down to being able to paint that authentic picture of what it's like to be working at this company. And we're starting to experiment with even getting some videos now from hiring managers that are creating a new position to be able to talk a little bit about their team and try to personalize it even that bit more.
Got it. Got it. Great. Okay, so what are some of the issues that you tend to face with candidates who are attempting coding assessments? I'm sure it's not going to be for folks who are taking assessments for the first time. There's obviously going to be a lot of questions or doubts. How do you tackle all of that?
Yeah, so it can be quite scary knowing that there's this assessment that's coming along. You've probably already had a great conversation with the recruiter. You're learning more about the company and you're fired up, right? You're like, okay, I'm ready for this. But then you know that, hey, there's this test coming along and I don't really know what it's about. So what we've tried to do, first of all, to make that a less scary and less unknown assessment is really like tell the candidate what they're going to have to do. We've gone to this stage where there's a walkthrough around here's what the assessment's going to involve. Here's the technologies that you should go and refresh on before you start. And we have 4 or 5 different assessments that we can send out, but at the core of it, what that person is going to be required to do is access an API, take some data, do something with that data, and then post their solution back to a different API. So there's a consistency across all of the assessments that we send out. And by making sure the candidate understands, what that's going to involve, it helps them feel prepared and helps mitigate, those assessments that maybe don't go so well. So it's really about helping to prepare the person coming in, even to the point of letting them know what they're going to be asked.
Got it. Great. Okay, so do you prefer using assessments for early talent or for experience? Now, I know a lot of experienced talent might have an aversion to taking assessments, right? So would you still use them for experienced talent, or would you use them a lot more for early talent?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this will surprise you or not, but we use the same assessment for somebody that is in their 3rd or 4th year in university applying for their first engineering internship, all the way up to your director of engineering with 10, 20 years experience.
Wow, that's crazy. The same assessment?
Same assessment, same criteria. We understand that as people are more tenured and are maybe moving more down a people leadership path, that they might we have a 3-hour time window to complete the assessment, and sometimes people need those 3 hours or may run over, and that's very different to somebody who is just finishing university, have spent a bunch of time getting ready for passing coding interviews and are really sharp on the tools. So there's definitely context there that's important. We believe that fundamentally what we're asking our candidates to do is at the heart of any software engineering role, and all of our technical leaders at HubSpot still code up to the director level. So the assessment there is really beneficial to sort of find out, who can still do it versus being, completely removed from the tech.
That's actually impressive. I mean, if you're saying that someone at a director or VP level of engineering still codes, because I know for a fact that a lot of companies don't. Folks who are at that position, a lot of companies don't. But that's quite impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, and that person may not be the best coder on the team anymore, and they might not get to code that often. But asking for is really in a microservices architecture where everything that we do involves getting data from one place, manipulating it in a certain way, and then being able to send it to a different service. That's pretty much at the staple of what most of our teams will do.
Got it. Okay. So, is there anything that you really have to keep in mind while designing the perfect assessment? Or is there anything called the perfect tech assessment in the first place?
No, I don't think there is a perfect assessment. What we're trying to do here is measure somebody's coding ability in what's still an artificial scenario. So, it's always going to feel a bit awkward. It's never going to be ideal. And it's incredibly hard to measure somebody's ability through an assessment. But it's better than the alternatives, right? By having that assessment, you think of like back to your high school exams, there's certain exams that you had to do where it all came down to your performance on the day. And, you open your paper, you answer your question, and, it's either it goes with you or it's something that you haven't studied for and it ends up being, a terrible time. By being able to, do your classwork as part of your, overall score before that examination, this continuous assessment idea removes that pressure and helps you, build your grade as you go along. So with the assessment, we think that, hey, this is your chance to, take this 1, 2, 3 hours out of what would have been on the interview day and do it at home. Do it in an environment that's comfortable. Do it on your own machine. So I think it's better than having to do it on the day in your interview. It also gives you some insight as to, how invested this company is in their hiring process and what it's going to be like to work there. And with the HubSpot assessment, right, we're just passing a big milestone where there's 10,000 people that have now completed it since it was rolled out in 2016, which is pretty crazy. But I think the core components are, is it realistic to the day-to-day work that an engineer is going to be doing? Can you make it about solving a problem rather than solving a puzzle? And what I mean by that is it something that can be approached from many different ways? Is it something where the person can solve the problem by working good, as opposed to being a puzzle where it's got a right answer and a wrong answer, and it's sort of a binary pass or fail sort of thing. So they would be the core attributes behind making the perfect assessment. But I think some of the other features that R1 has is it can be done in any programming language. So we use Java at HubSpot, but if you're working in C# every day, or working on something like Go or Ruby, you can jump in and complete that, and that's again takes a little bit of that stress away rather than trying to solve it in the language that the company uses. So I don't think there's a perfect one, but there's definitely steps that you can take to make it a more enjoyable experience for the candidate.
Got it. Great. Okay, so we did speak about experienced hiring as well through assessments, and you did mention that everyone, whether you've just fresh out of college or whether you are applying for a director or VP position, still need to go through an assessment. Now, and I also did mention that there could probably be situations where like people are a little averse to taking assessments. Have you had situations like that when you sent out an assessment and people have been like, "Hey, I don't want to do an assessment right now"? How have you tackled those?
Those scenarios come up, and when somebody's actively seeking a new role, they could be in process with 3 or 4 other companies. They've all got their own assessments. They're all 2-3 hours long. So that really adds up. So there's definitely scenarios where, just for whatever reason, that person doesn't want to attempt the assessment. And that's okay. We're happy to look at other ways to show that person's, proficiency with coding. If somebody has a project on GitHub. That can be a great way to sort of show, here's something that I've worked on that I'm proud of, that I want to show off. Any side projects that person might have will also work. Or sometimes we can, we at the face-to-face interview stage, we do have a coding interview, and it's possible to, do that coding interview over Zoom, like we're doing now, and have that engineer do a screen share of their coding environment as they run through, a coding question that way. So rather than investing those 3 hours, we can cut that down to an hour and have that interaction with a real HubSpot engineer. The only challenge with that is at the scale that we're hiring at, it's not always going to be possible to have that one-to-one interaction with an engineer. So we do prefer the assessment, but we understand that every different.
Got it. Okay. The only concern is you might lose out on some really good candidates if if it's assessment only. And it's good to know that you have a backup in mind in terms of what you would still go through. But of course, I'm sure you would prefer assessments to be standard across the entire process.
Yeah, it's our interview process is pretty thorough, and the assessment is a way of just reducing the pressure of that interview day. So it really is the candidate's advantage to be able to do that in advance rather than doing it at the office. But every now and again, you need to, if there's somebody coming through that you feel like is that that 10x developer that's in demand, we really need to be flexible there and figure out the solution that's going to work.
Got it. Okay, so in terms of interviews as well, right? So do you have a tool that you're going to be using for technical interviews, or do you still do this over Skype? Because I'm sure everything's remote now, right? And you can't have people on site, and you can't really sit with the hiring manager either. So how do you do that now?
Yeah. It's again, since COVID, everything's changed. From end of March, we've moved to being fully remote for all of our interviews. So everything now happens over Zoom. Which has been a huge change. We've got pretty nice offices at HubSpot, and we used to really enjoy, bringing somebody to the office, giving them the tour, and really, giving the experience of seeing what it's like to work there. So we can't do that anymore, and we've had to adapt to the situation that we're in. So all of our interviews are happening, remotely over Zoom. We will typically have 3 technical interviews and a hiring manager interview. And, I've already mentioned with the coding interview, we're able to do that through a screen share. We have a virtual whiteboard that we use for systems design. And then most of the other conversations are just, technical conversations that can happen, through the Zoom chat. We send a survey to every single person that interviews at HubSpot, asking about their experience and trying to get feedback on how we can make the process better. And what we're seeing is, since we moved to fully remote interviewing in March, the feedback from our candidates is higher than it's ever been. People love interviewing remotely. It's more flexible. They don't have to, make an excuse that they're going to the dentist that day or whatever it might be. And it gives us the opportunity, because it's not programmed into one single meeting, we can have that interview happen over 2 days or over 3 days to really suit that person's, individual situation. So it is challenging. It's not quite the same as meeting somebody in person, but with the technology that we have, and being a very remote forward company, we've been able to adapt and still create that great interviewing experience.
Great. And it's good. It's good that you guys have also been in a position to maintain your candidate experience while even while everything is gone remote. Because I hear from a lot of a lot of people I know that the one struggle that they've had is to give that same feel. I mean, you take them to an office tour, you bring them over, you show them what it's like to work in your company. All of that is not really possible when you're going completely remote. And as a result, I've heard that a lot of people have been telling me that, hey, I'm not able to give that sort of a candidate experience while interviewing or onboarding them. Right. So it's good to know that, candidate experience is not scuppered by
Yeah.
moving remote, even at HubSpot.
And you mentioned a tour as well. We've recorded some virtual tours of our
Oh,
offices in Boston and Dublin. So, you can jump on there. It's never going to be the same as actually being at the office, but you get a sense of what it's like and some of the people that were working there pre-COVID. And I think the other element is just really trying to um, you know show the personalities of the people that work in your team. And we talked a little bit about the employer branding team earlier, but they maintain HubSpot HubSpot Life handle that's on Facebook and Instagram. And anyone that is going through the hiring process can jump on there and sort of get a bit of an insight into who works at HubSpot, what do they do, and what are they talking about, what do they care about. So there's a bunch of interesting stuff.
great, great, fantastic. All right. So we spoke a lot about assessments. We spoke about what goes into making a good coding assessment as well. Do you have any stories from your time at HubSpot wherein you probably would have found an unconventional candidate or somebody who probably would not have been hired if it wasn't for an assessment?
Hmm. Um, yeah, great question. I think um, I, what comes to mind is, you know, we're at HubSpot, we're really focused on building diverse engineering teams, right? We know that the best teams are diverse teams, and the best engineers want to work for diverse teams. In the past, right? We would advertise a role. People would apply for it. That really first interaction is with a person on the recruiting team who's looking at a resume. They're going, where does this person work? What technologies have they used? Do they look like they're a fit for my role? And it happens in most companies, and that's the first step of the screening process. But inherently there's bias there. We're all programmed to be able to make decisions quickly. Typically we've got a couple of hundred applications to get through for each role, and our biases are just our brain's way of making quick decisions and working efficiently. But by doing that, there's risks that you're going to miss out on amazing talent. And by only moving forward with people that have worked at a similar type of company, that have used the same tech stack as you, you're going to end up with a really homogenous team. So with the coding assessment, we now send that to pretty much everyone, and let the assessment do the screening rather than using that recruiters you know decision making. And by doing that, it's allowed us to hire people that we may have not previously considered. We've hired people from backgrounds that we wouldn't have maybe initially thought of, and hired people that have come from different tech stacks, and bringing different viewpoints and experience that's really helped enrich our team. So I know you asked for a specific example, but that's something that we made that change about a year ago. And if I look at some of the people that we're hiring right now, I'm really proud that the assessment has helped with hiring that type of talent rather than them being screened out before getting their chance.
Yeah, I mean, I always keep telling people that coding is very objective, right? It's very quantifiable, right? And the only thing that should matter in terms of whether you're gonna make whether you're gonna make the cut or not should be skills. It should be how well you can code, right? And when it's only when we take off all these factors that lead to bias, like it could be pedigree, it could be where you work for, like you did mention, like, you know, if you're looking for a specific type of company, specific type of person, everyone's gonna just look very homogenous, right? So if we were to be recruiting without those filters in place, I think we would definitely be in a position to hire only the best type of folks who really fit the bill in terms of what we're trying to achieve, rather than hiring for people who you think looks good on paper, maybe.
Yeah, it's a real leveler, and you know, giving everyone the exact same first step is a great way to build the rest of your hiring process.
Got it. Got it. Well, great. Well, that's about all the time we have today, and it brings us to the end of this episode of This is Recruiting. It was really great talking to you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alfred. Thanks for running through the questions, and I hope that helps some of your listeners.
Great. I mean, I sure have enjoyed speaking with you today, and I've personally learned a lot of stuff as well. And for all of you listening, if you've learned something new, please feel free to go ahead and like and share this video to spread the word. And remember, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well so that you're notified the next time we launch an episode of This is Recruiting. See you soon.